So for all of us that are working in the world of data protection, this is our day to acknowledge the fact that, we're all awesome. So yay us. So moving on from that, because it can't just be about me, sadly, let me just introduce myself and then I'm going to kick off proper with the session. So I'm a co-founder of Databasix, 20 years of experience working in public-private sector. I used to be the head of data management at Public Health England. I left Public Health England and then set up Databasix and have done data management and data protection for 9 years now with the company. So that's a little bit about me. Before I kick off into my slides, I'd be really interested to know, because I'm obviously going to tell you what I think my challenges are, or my view on the challenges. What do you think the challenges are for 2022 for you? I'd be really interested to know, and I'll see if they align with what I have said. So I'll give you a moment or two to do some typing. Yes, UK diverging from the EU GDPR. I'm definitely covering that. Hybrid working, yes. I think it's going to be a continued challenge for us. Yes, moving data into the cloud. I think there's a constant drive for us moving information into the cloud. And again, I'll be covering that. So thank you for sharing those views. Obviously, as I'm talking, if there's anything else you want to share or question, let me know. We do have a new information commissioner. It'd be really interesting to see what his take is. He's got some big decisions. We've got obviously the review of the data protection legislation in this country. That we'll see what happens with that. We'll see if he has a stronger stance on fining companies than the previous commissioner. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting year for all of us managing data protection. So I have got a lot to cover, and this isn't all of it, but I do want to talk about US federal law in terms of data protection. Is it something that we need to consider now? There are a number of new European legislations that are coming in over the next 12 months, which I think we should consider. We have updates to UK law and the new information commissioner. We are seeing last year a significant number of cyber attacks. So what we're thinking about, it's when, not if. I'm going to talk about processing vaccine data. Previously noticed scrutiny, we've got retention. I'm talking about migrating data into the cloud. I'm talking a little bit about data quality, because I wouldn't be the data nerd that I am if I didn't talk about data quality. And I'll talk about international data transfers as well. So full on session today. So let's kick off. So some of you may have organizations that you work with in the US. You may be part of a US organization. So you may have seen over the years, there has been an ongoing discussion in America about data privacy legislation. At the moment, it's focused on a consumer level. We have the Californian Consumer Protection Act. It's followed by a few others that are coming into force this year and over the next 18 months, and they will be from the likes of Colorado and Virginia. But there is a movement to want to make data protection in the US a federal law, so it's not state by state. The consensus is at the moment, and I'd be interested to read if there's anyone on the webinar that wants to challenge this or add any comments. The consensus is that it won't be this year. So there will be continued movement on a state level to introduce data protection regulations. Again, it's more focused at the consumer rights rather than it is here in Europe, where we cover all individuals. It's not just the consumer. So, there are other states like Maryland, Oklahoma, Ohio, New Jersey, Florida, and Alaska. They're all in various stages of discussing and trying to get this through the appropriate channels. So Just one to keep an eye out. It's what's going on in America. I think it's an interesting position to see if they do have a federal law. But only time will tell. But it's something to keep an eye on, but not necessarily going to happen for the whole of the country right now. Now, what's really interesting is that there is a lot going on in Europe right now. So there is and has been, let's be clear, Europe has been much more prolific at fining companies at all different areas of the data protection regulation. It's not just about breaches in security principles. There have been fines for inappropriately appointing data protection officers, non-compliance with privacy statements. There have been, in terms of legal justification, in terms of companies not having the right legal basis, for example. So there is very much the anticipation that regulators are going to expand their lens and focus really early this year on data breaches, in particular on legal bases. So things to consider for anyone that's listening on the webinar is, how confident are you that you are relying on the most appropriate legal basis for processing all of your types of data, website users, employees, applicants? You might have clients, prospective clients, volunteers if you're in the charity sector, donors. There'll be a whole raft of people that you're processing data on. So are you confident that you have the most appropriate legal basis? There will be the look at cross-border data flows. So do we have the appropriate mechanisms in place? Have you done the necessary risk assessments if you are transferring data to third countries? So those are countries outside of the UK or outside of having an adequacy decision. So we can continue to transfer data between the UK and Europe and vice versa at the moment, though that might change if we veer too drastically with our proposed changes to the Data Protection Act in this country. But there's also expected to be a focus on protecting children's data. In this country, we introduced the children's regulation with regards to managing children's data on web services, for example. And one of those requirements was to make sure that we gave children appropriate transparency and understandable language use in terms of how we're using their data. So again, if you process children's data, are you complying with our regulation in this country? And again, there will be continued focus on sensitive data. So are you appropriately processing it with the right condition under the GDPR? Now, there is also some additional pieces of regulation that are coming out. So there is, I'm not sure if it's going to be this year, but the e-privacy regulation, which in this country in domestic law is the Privacy Electronic and Communications Regulation. It's been in place since 2003. Certainly in Europe, there has been many discussion about introducing an updated version. It was meant to be updated in 2018. There was the belief it was going to come in 2020. And it hasn't so far. But obviously, let's keep an eye on that, because within e-privacy, we have things such as cookies. And certainly in Europe, there is a lot of discussion about what is the appropriate legal basis for processing cookies on devices. There was obviously this Data Governance Act, which I think sounds quite interesting as a regulation. And again, it'd be one to look out for. And there is the European Union are looking at, because there's this increase in AI and more companies are using AI in their ways of working, they are looking to introduce an AI Act, which obviously has broad implications for algorithmic, God, that's a long word for me to say today, decision making across the economy. And then finally, we do have to think about the relationship between Europe and the US. We used to have Privacy Shield that got debunked 2 years ago. At the moment, we're now having to do international risk assessments. We're doing standard contract clauses between transferring data from Europe to the US. So it'll be interesting to see if there is an actual agreement about how to safely transfer data and store it in the US without the US authorities necessarily being able to get access to that data. Now, obviously, lots of you probably use data in an everyday basis to be able to make decisions. It is used to be able to inform our services. It is used to be able to demonstrate the impact that we have on business. So data is becoming more and more embedded in our lives. Thanks to the greater amount of data collection that we have, but a lot to do with artificial intelligence. So we do need to bear that in mind. And I think if you are looking to go down that route, don't just think about UK regulation, do take in consideration European pieces of that, because, we're no longer just, well, technically we are still an island because we isolated ourselves from Europe, but we do need to be mindful of European legislation, especially if we have European clients, for example. And let's not forget that the UK has a data strategy as well, which we are looking to talk about, scientific research. And I also believe that Europe are looking at how scientific research can be used. So let's keep an eye out on all of those kind of pieces of regulation. But let's actually focus a little bit on the UK side of things. So last year, there was a bit of discussion about the immigration exemption that applies under the Data Protection Act, in that it was argued that between the UK Data Protection Act and the UK General Data Protection Regulation, there was a disconnect and they were actually incompatible. So what has happened on the 31st of January, which is Monday, the government will introduce the Data Protection Act 2018 Amendment of Schedule 2 exemption. And what this essentially allows is that it's now limited, so it's limited in scope, so to the Home Office, to the Home Secretary. Now, the important thing is that this is the only real change that we've had to UK data protection law at the moment. It has come in, but it's one to be mindful of. Now, the bigger changes is last year, at the end of last year, before Elizabeth Denham left the post of ICO, we started the consultation for the new data protection legislation. So what they were considering as part of the UK Data Protection Act is this reintroduction of a notional fee for subject access requests. For those of us that have been around long enough, we all knew we had to update our processes to remove the £10 fee. There is now the concept of a new fee, I don't know what that is, coming in, but also a way of being able to support vexatious data subject access requests. And certainly I've seen quite a lot of those. The proposed changes to the UK legislation is also talking about things like removing the requirement to designate a data protection officer. However, it is emphasising the need to have a privacy management programme, which will require you as organisations to define the roles and responsibilities within your organisation with respect to data protection. It will also ask you to demonstrate your evidence. So how are you accountable? So the ICO's accountability framework might be something that you wish to take a look at. Do you have support from senior management in terms of enforcing and managing your privacy management program? And how are you going to, it would want you to be able to monitor that effectively. So some of you may have appointed a data protection officer. You may still wish to have that, especially if you interact with Europe, you may still be required to have one. Do think about what is your privacy management team going to be. And some of you might even have created a GDPR team because you don't have a data protection officer. There is obviously this concept of changing breach reporting threshold. So apparently, and I'm just going to make sure I get this right, there is a proposal that breaches would be reportable to the ICO unless there is a risk to individuals that are not material. So essentially, my reading of that is that risk of the breaches will need to be reported to the Information Commissioner. They are going to produce guidance about what non-material risk actually constitutes. So that's something we're all going to want to know about, because we don't want to be contacting the ICO every time there is a breach. It makes no sense. There is, under the UK data protection, this movement to make Google Analytics no longer classed as non-essential. So at the moment, you would have all implemented, I hope, privacy and data protection controls on your website, which includes cookie management, and you would have moved all of your Google Analytics to non-essential, and you're hoping that people visiting your site have clicked yes, so that you can get invaluable insights in terms of what's going on your website. So the ICO and the government are looking about changing cookies. That does not mean that you don't need to consider Europe, because obviously if you've got people from Europe visiting your website, you do need to be mindful of European law and cookies. The other thing I would say is a lot of us are employers here. The ICO has always produced really good guidance on how to manage employee data. They are currently reviewing that guidance. And certainly once it's out, I will do a webinar on that. But it is really good for us to keep an eye on when that is, because it allows us to make sure that we are compliant with the UK regulations when it comes to employment data. And finally, we do have a new Information Commissioner. He is John Edwards. He was previously the Privacy Commissioner in New Zealand. I don't think he ever hid the fact that he was not the biggest fan of big tech, in particular social media companies. So it will be incredibly interesting to see what he is going to do in this country when it comes to big tech firms, especially my interpretation of the new changes to data protection laws are trying to encourage big tech and better, easier data transfers. So we'll see. Do any of you think that you're going to have significant challenges with any of these proposed changes to UK data protection law? Would you welcome a move to have a privacy management team? Would this help provide you with a bit more kind of an argument to your senior management team to say, hey, I need a bit of backup, I need some more support, I need a bigger team? Or would you prefer that we keep with the current legislation? I'd be interested to read what you have to say before I move on. Nice. I like the idea of privacy management teams, actually. I like the idea of it being a more organisational approach to data protection rather than it just being one individual. Although I do also like the role of a data protection officer. But I think there is a risk if we move away from the GDPR as it is. Does it affect our adequacy agreement that we currently have with Europe, which allows us to for data to flow between us? So there are many risks with us changing the legislation. Brilliant. It's good to see that I think this concept of a privacy management team seems to be popular, which I like. But no, thank you. It's always good to hear or read, should I say, what people are saying on that respect. And obviously you need to plan for this. So if it does change, you'll need to make sure you've got some kind of resource for yourself or time allocated to review what the changes are and how it impacts on you. Now, we do have in Europe, they introduced the European standard contract clauses. They came in June last year. Across Europe, the European Commission gave all organisations a grace period of up to the 27th of December 2022 to amend contracts. So any contract that was before the 27th of September 2021, so you should know all of the contracts that you have in place that involve international data transfers that are relying on the old EU standard contract clauses. So knowing what they are, you should be in a position or working with your legal teams to make sure that you are updating appropriately your standard contract clauses. Now, helpfully, in the UK, the proposed UK international data transfers do say that we are going to have an addendum to the European standard contract clauses. So I actually think that's quite positive when it comes to data transfers. So the standard contract clauses in Europe have got the data controller to data processor to data processor relationship. So please make sure that you understand your data flows, you understand your international data transfers, you know what contracts need to be reviewed. Look to engage your legal team so that they can make sure that you have the most appropriate contracts in place for you. And in this country, we do have the International Data Transfer Agreement, which, like I said, it talks about this addendum. As part of the proposed changes to the IDTA, the ICO is considering whether to issue it as an addendum. So we would adopt the European standard contract clauses. So please be aware of that. That's going to be a time-consuming and a potentially a costly exercise for everybody, but you do have till the 27th of December. And I'm sure if there are any legal teams on this webinar, they don't want to be inundated with crazy requests a couple of weeks before Christmas in making sure these contracts are up to date. So do take into consideration what is going on with your international data transfers. And then you do need to consider the third country. So don't just think about the data transfers between the UK and Europe, because obviously that's covered by an adequacy agreement. Think about all the different countries that you are transferring data to. So this is a really interesting one, processing vaccination data. So the ICO has a vaccination and COVID pass hub, which I would encourage you all to take a look at. In general, there isn't really a justification for processing employees' vaccination status unless what the ICO have stated, you are legally required to be vaccinated against COVID-19 to perform their role. So if that is the case, that has to be clearly defined. Employees need to understand that. You work somewhere where the employees are more likely to encounter those infected with COVID-19, or they could pose a risk to clinically vulnerable individuals. And obviously, let's not forget that in November, the Care Quality Commission registered care homes for adults in England have now made it a requirement that everyone that works there is fully vaccinated. Now, if you are doing that, so if you do know that you work in an environment where actually there is a legal requirement to do so, make sure your staff are aware for that. Make sure you've updated your employee privacy notices. Make sure the employment contract reflects that. If there isn't a legal requirement to do so, you really, because we are talking about health data here, it is sensitive information, I would really be wanting you to conduct a privacy impact assessment so that you really understood the risks that are involved in collecting this data, and that you have considered the individuals in terms of the impact on their privacy, and that if you are going to do this, that you have put the necessary measures in place to control and manage that information. Unless, like I said, unless it's legally required, I would not see a justification for collecting this. Actually, I'm not going to ask that. I was going to ask the question to see if anybody is doing that, but that would be unfair. So I'm not going to ask it. Now, the other thing I'd like to encourage you all to do, I don't think it's done often enough. I'd be happy to be told differently, but privacy policies technically don't get updated as quickly, in my opinion, as what they should do. They aren't just a one-off document that when the regulation came in that you publish. They really should be a reflection of your activity in terms of what you process, how you process it, why you process it. So where changes have happened, whether it be to third-party suppliers, to the type of data that you're processing, to the justification as to why you're processing it, your privacy policies, whether these are the website ones or your employee ones or specific to actual individuals, should be maintained and should be kept up to date. So the first thing I'd like to encourage you all to do is, if you haven't reviewed your privacy policy in the last 12 months, check it. Check it against your processing activities and see if it's actually an accurate reflection of what you do. The other reason I wanted to put this up there is because last year the Irish Data Protection Commissioner issued a really hefty fine, which admittedly WhatsApp are appealing at this moment in time, but they have issued a fine of 225 million because in their view, WhatsApp were failing to discharge its transparency obligations under the EU GDPR. It was a massive decision that was issued. The argument was that in the privacy policy, they were simply not clear enough, in particular where non-users. So if I am a WhatsApp user, if you go onto your WhatsApp account, you will also see other people who are also on there, who are in your contacts that happen to be on WhatsApp. Now, WhatsApp are processing that data, and they were never clear that they did that. So I don't expect there to be other significant, well, that's not true actually, I'm sure there will be other significant fines when it comes to privacy statements. This is one that was obviously approved by the whole of Europe. But for me, the first principle of the regulation is to be fair, lawful and transparent. So we must remember the transparent element of that principle. So please, please make a note for one of your challenges this year is to review and update your privacy notices, whether they be on the website, whether they be on your apps, whether they be on employees or whoever the individual types are. Make sure they are reviewed, because data subjects are becoming a little bit more aware of what their rights are, and they will look at privacy notices. How many of you look at privacy notices before you download a new app or before you use a new supplier? Do you go to the privacy policy? Do you want to check to see when it was last updated, what they process, who they share data with? Is that an activity that any of you currently do? Okay. Maybe it's just me that likes to scrutinize other people's privacy policies to see how transparent they are. If you don't do it, I would recommend, it's always good to see what other people say that they do, and if it's a disconnect between what you've actually heard. So I can see some people are saying yes, so that's a bit of a relief. Good to see that we've also got some people drafting privacy policies. I know a lot of people, especially a lot of children, when they download an app, they simply don't read the privacy policy. That's for sure. So there's probably a whole lot of data being processed on children that we're not aware of. Okay, so how many of you would you say are prepared for a cyber attack? So how many of you think, oh, it may happen to us, we're too small, we're not going to be subject to a ransomware attack? So you take the if approach rather than when. So how many of you would you say do that kind of risk-based assessment to say actually it's if rather than when? None of these notes are being recorded, by the way, so don't need to. Yeah, so we got some doing a yearly penetration test, which is great, because actually I think it's incredibly important that you understand your vulnerabilities across your network. I'm not sure how many other people do that, but it's certainly a recommendation I give to clients, is to understand, if you're telling me and your IT policy tells me that you have robust measures, how do you demonstrate that? A penetration test is definitely one way of being able to test that and plug any of the vulnerabilities that you have. I think it's important that you have these kind of if scenario. What happens if we were subject to a ransomware attack? What happens if one of our members of staff was to accidentally press a phishing scam email and we end up paying an invoice for £40,000? I know a number of people that have had those types of invoices that have almost pressed that link, and could cost them a sizable amount of money. If some of you are in the more kind of technical types of industries, or you're in an industry that you're collecting data that might be seen as really interesting, you might actually be targeted regardless of your size, because actually the type of data that you process could be incredibly interesting. So my approach to this is really, now that we're in 2022, it should no longer be a consideration that it may happen. We need to plan for it happening and making sure that we have a plan in place that we can recover from that. Now, that might be that you need to make sure that you have the appropriate insurances in place, so that should you be subject to a cyber attack, you have got people that can come in and forensically look over your systems to make sure that the vulnerability has gone once the incident has occurred. Now, certainly in the UK, the cybersecurity breaches survey of last year said that 4 in 10 small businesses and 3 in 10 charities reported cyber breaches in the 12 months prior to the report being published in May last year. Now, that goes up in terms of 65% for medium-sized businesses, and it was about 70% for large businesses. So it really is a matter of it's going to happen at some point to one of us. And 80% of companies surveyed indicated that it was a priority. And it sounds like for those that are on this today, you also see it as a priority. So what should you be thinking about doing? If this is a challenge for you, my suggestion to you is, don't blame the employee. If they're not aware of what to look out for, it's not surprising that they click a link. Make sure that you have a risk assessment of your greatest vulnerabilities. What are the systems that need the highest level of security that you need to make sure are being protected? What are your IT teams putting in place to help manage the risk? Because you're never going to be risk-free. How do you continuously raise awareness amongst your staff about awareness of cyber attacks? Do you do phishing tests, for example, just to see if there is actually a vulnerability? So get buy-in from senior management, because they can be incredibly costly. So please plan for a cyber attack. Now, in that same vein, one of the challenges I see is that over the last couple of years, not every company that I have had a conversation with has had a business continuity plan. Now, it's not just a plan for ransomware attacks or a cyber attack. It does cover all your types of risks as an organization, whether it be flood, cyber, supply chain failure, pandemic, for example, a building fire. So if you know that you're going to plan for a if rather than when, that should be built into your business continuity plan. What would happen in the first 24 hours of an incident happening, whether the building's on fire or you've been subject to a cyber attack? What would you need to recover within the next 48 hours, a week after? Who do you need to contact, including your staff and your clients? How do you get new equipment? How do you get new furniture? And what are your kind of plans in terms of if we were to have another pandemic? We can all work from home now, but is there anything else you need to consider? So for one of the things I'd want you to think about is creating a plan and then testing it. And again, a business continuity plan is a live document that should be reviewed every couple of months. Now, like I said, I'm a data nerd, so actually data quality is something that's incredibly close to my heart. So how often do you routinely check the validity of the data in your systems? Now, obviously, this isn't just personal data. It could be any data. But if we are a data-driven business, or we are using algorithms based on data, we want to be confident that the algorithm is computing the right output. So do you have a data quality plan in place? It is a principle of the regulation. If you're processing personal data, you should update data ideally, as soon as you're aware that it is inaccurate, remembering that individuals have the right to rectification. So they have the right to challenge you and ask for their data to be updated if it isn't inaccurate, especially if important decisions are being made on that data and it happens to be wrong. So if you are using a wealth of data to drive your businesses forward, what are your plans in terms of creating data quality? So think about creating a data quality plan. Think about introducing measures by which you are going to follow those appropriately. So do put something in place. I think it could actually end up being something that you can promote and really, hopefully, it's a sales point to you. How many of you can I ask? How many of you regularly check the quality of your data? Do you have, a data quality regime or program in place, or is there a best practice guide that you'd want to share with everybody here that says actually this is the one thing I would recommend that you all do, other than have a plan? I can see some typing, so I'll give it a minute, and then I'm going to bring up my next slide. So not only should we have plans for data quality, but I would definitely recommend that this is a year where we really need to make sure that we keep on top of retention. So I go into far too many companies and data is kept for far too long because it's nice to have. It could be useful for us in the future. But we do need to be mindful that when we are processing personal data, individuals do have the right to ask for their data to be deleted if they find out that their data is being kept longer than is absolutely necessary. So for me, one of the challenges I think we have to face is introduce records management policies and processes. So this is not just about personal data. This is about all the data and the information that we process as an organization, and really set out clear guidelines about what needs to be kept, how long it needs to be kept for, what are the decisions that need to be made when we decide either to extend a retention period or we make a decision that we need to dispose of the data, whether it be we are shredding that information or whether we are destroying that data electronically, or if we are archiving that. So I would like to see a greater focus on records management. I'd like to see more robust retention policies and procedures in place, and more importantly, the systems that you're using supporting those policies. Because typically the question I get is, well, we have a policy, Kelly, but how do we follow it? How do I get people to realize that these data now need to be removed or destroyed? So certainly, I would recommend introducing records management, because like I said, people are getting more cute about what their data is and what is being processed. So I would expect to see more deletion requests coming our way. Again, any of you want to share any great retention approaches that you have, any systems that are good for storing retention, do feel free to type. I will share those. There is my other challenge, I think, is going to continue to happen, and there was a mass migration to the cloud before or at the time we had started with COVID, but we are seeing more and more people move into the cloud, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what we do need to consider is that there are risks in that migration to the cloud. So when we're thinking about data protection, where in the world is that data going to be stored? If it's going to be stored in third countries, we need to be thinking about international data transfers. We need to be thinking, moving away from data transfers, we need to be thinking about the level of security that is in place. So how do your third-party vendors make sure or demonstrate to you that your data is safe and secure, especially if you're processing highly sensitive health, criminal information, sexual orientation, religious or philosophical beliefs, so any of the special category data. So whilst we are doing those migrations to the cloud, and that is super exciting that that is happening, are we aware, or are you aware of what the risks could be to your organization if that goes wrong? So the common risks are there's not really a plan in place. It felt like it was a good idea at the time, and that's happened. Because of the types of data you're processing, in particular the more special category of data, the common risk is that a data protection impact assessment has not been considered, not been conducted. Therefore, you haven't really looked at the entire process from beginning to end of that migration and that system use. And then there is this, you've moved and then you realize it's actually not compatible with the other business systems that you have in place. And sadly, we do see a loss of data, which could lead to a data breach. So migrating to the cloud is not a bad thing, but I do want you to think about, if this is something that is on your agenda for the next 12 months, think about how you're going to mitigate those risks. If you're responsible for data protection, whether you are the DPO or in the privacy management team, or are leading the kind of the risk element of the business, make sure that this is considered and that those risks are being managed appropriately. And then finally, because I have been rambling on for quite some time, other predictions that I have are that I am seeing a lot more backlash from employees because of the monitoring that is happening in terms of productivity. So if you're going to continue to have this hybrid working, which a lot of organizations will have, and you're looking at introducing employee monitoring, again, have you considered the risks? Have you completed a privacy impact assessment? And have you been transparent with your employees about doing that? We're seeing big tech give more controls, which I think is a good thing to individuals. So if big tech are doing it and you happen to be a tech company, what controls are you giving to individuals to have greater control over their data? And if the last 6 weeks have been any indication, pre and post Christmas, there are a lot more people in my experience that are getting very, very clued up about what their rights are. And just to give you an example, I've had a number of clients that have been given sent a letter that tells them that they are in breach of the Privacy Electronic Communications Regulation because of cookies. We've had a number of subject access requests from very unhappy customers and staff, and these are taking significant amount of time. So be aware that people are getting more clued up about their privacy. So questions. We've got a minute or two before I wrap this up. Are there any questions for me? Wow. I would say that anybody that is using vaccination status as a justification for paying some staff different to the others, I think is a real employment issue, and one that they would. I mean, I'm not an employment lawyer, but I'm not sure how you justify that. And I know that there have been some supermarkets that have suggested that, but they would have to justify that. I don't agree with paying sick pay differently. We all have a choice, whether we agree with that choice or not when it comes to being vaccinated or unvaccinated. I don't think your sick pay should be impacted by that decision, and I'm sure that will be challenged legally. Of course, if there are any employment lawyers here that wants to argue and explain on that a bit more, that'd be great. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to just wrap up the last couple of slides, but I'll be happy. What do you think is the greatest risk? Do you know, I think the greatest risk is moving between home and the workplace. You'll definitely have a copy of the slides. So I think that because we are now working in 2 different locations more regularly, I think the chance of us losing a laptop because our car gets stolen and we've left it in the boot of the car, we've left papers in the wrong location, I think is the movement of data between home and the office, I think is a risk that we need to be mindful of when it comes to hybrid working. There is on the waiting room, there was our hybrid infographic. If you want me to send that afterwards to anybody, do let me know. I'll happily send that to you. So obviously, quick summary, we can help if you want policies reviewed, training of your staff. If you need a privacy management team that's virtual, we have that option. Up until the 31st of January, we have an offer, which is if you buy two of our courses, so buy our introduction to data protection for 2 members of staff, you get a 3rd person for free. Like I said, that expires on Monday. You're welcome to join our best practice group that we have, and you can also download our catalogue of all the fun stuff that we offer. And then finally, do follow us on social. There is lots of stuff that we've got. We've got webinars on our YouTube channel. We've got infographics. We've got blogs and stuff. So yeah, do follow us and subscribe. But thank you.